Have you ever witnessed someone's arrogance collapse in an instant? That moment when privilege meets its match and the world shifts beneath their feet? Today's story isn't just about racism, it's about what happens when someone picks the wrong target at the wrong time. A first-class cabin. A young black girl. A white woman who couldn't accept her presence. Sweetheart, I think you're confused. This section is for first-class passengers only. The words hung in the air of the crowded plane. 17-year-old Nia Carter clutched her boarding pass tighter, feeling every eye turned toward her. But the woman who spoke them, Pamela Ashford, had no idea who was about to walk through that cabin door. Because sometimes justice arrives wearing a pilot's uniform. If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or had your place questioned, this story will hit differently. Subscribe now and comment where you're watching from, because what happens next exposes how quickly racism crumbles when power shifts hands. The Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport buzzed with holiday travelers that December morning. Suitcases rolled across polished floors. Christmas music played softly through speakers. And somewhere between Gate C-22 and her future stood Nia Carter, a 17-year-old whose quiet confidence masked years of learning to navigate spaces that questioned her belonging. This wasn't just any flight. This was her chance to finally spend time with her father in New York City after months apart. The first-class ticket wasn't purchased. It came through an airline app upgrade bonus. A small blessing that would soon become the center of a storm. When the gate agent called for Group 1 boarding, Nia rose with her carry-on. That's when she felt it, that familiar weight of eyes tracking her movement. Judging. Questioning. Assuming. She'd felt it before in honors classes. In upscale stores. In restaurants where hosts looked past her to the white families behind her. But today would be different. Today would change everything. Pamela Ashford strode toward the gate like she owned it. Designer handbag. Expensive watch. The kind of confidence that comes from never being questioned. Her blonde bob swayed with each determined step as she spotted Nia approaching the priority boarding line. Excuse me, Pamela's voice cut through the gate area chatter. They're calling first class right now. Economy boards later. Nia looked up, momentarily confused. I know. I'm in first class. The laugh that escaped Pamela's lips wasn't just dismissive. It was a weapon. Oh honey, I think you misheard the announcement. The gate attendant, a middle-aged woman named Beverly, looked between them. Your boarding pass, miss? Nia handed it over, feeling her heart pound against her ribs. The scanner beeped green. You're all set, Miss Carter. Enjoy your flight. Pamela's face tightened. There must be some mistake. I've been a platinum member for 15 years and suddenly they're giving first-class seats too. She stopped herself, but the unspoken word lingered. Have you ever watched someone try to hide their racism behind policy? Behind concerns about who belongs where? Drop AIs in the comments if you've seen this behavior before. As Nia walked down the jet bridge, she texted her mother, "It's happening again." The response came quickly, "Remember who you are. Remember whose daughter you are." Little did anyone know how prophetic those words would become. Because sometimes justice doesn't just arrive, it flies the entire plane. If you're still with me, you're about to witness one of the most satisfying moments of comeuppance ever recorded. Like this video right now if you've ever wanted to see privilege get the reality check it deserves. The first-class cabin gleamed with promise, leather seats, complimentary champagne, flight attendants whose smiles seemed genuine rather than practiced. Nia found her window seat and settled in, hoping the confrontation at the gate was the end of it. It wasn't. Pamela Ashford appeared in the aisle, ticket clutched between manicured fingers. Her eyes darted from her boarding pass to the seat number above Nia's row. The color drained from her face as realization dawned. This can't be right, she muttered, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. They've seated me next to. The flight attendant appeared. Is there a problem, ma'am? Pamela's voice rose. Yes, there's a problem. I paid extra for comfort. I won't spend 3 hours squeezed beside. She gestured vaguely toward Nia without finishing her sentence. Phones emerged from pockets. Passengers exchanged glances. The confrontation was becoming a spectacle, and Pamela didn't seem to care. Ma'am, this is your assigned seat. The flight is full. We ask that all passengers remain in their designated seats. Pamela wasn't finished. She leaned toward the attendant, lowering her voice to a stage whisper that carried perfectly through the quiet cabin. Look, I didn't want to say this, but I overheard this girl saying something about her father arranging this seat. Maybe she used his miles illegally or hacked the system. That happens, doesn't it? For security's sake, you should double-check. The accusation hung in the air, not just questioning Nia's seat but her character. Her honesty. her right to exist in that space. What Pamela didn't know, what none of them knew, was exactly who Nia's father was. And he was much closer than anyone realized. If you've made it this far, you're about to witness the moment everything changes. Comment justice if you're ready for what happens next. The holiday rush at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport created a backdrop of controlled chaos. Families dragged overstuffed luggage. Business travelers moved with practiced efficiency. And through it all, Nia Carter navigated with a careful awareness that came from being a young black woman in America. Nia wasn't just any 17-year-old. Honor student at Westlake Academy. Early acceptance to Columbia University. The kind of daughter who made parents proud not just through achievement, but through character. Her mother, Dr. Vanessa Carter, had raised her with a dual education, academics and the unwritten curriculum of existing while black in privileged spaces. Never let them make you small, her mother would say. Your presence isn't a privilege, it's a right. Those words echoed as Nia settled into her window seat, trying to ignore Pamela's continued huffs of indignation beside her. The woman had reluctantly taken her assigned seat but made her displeasure known through every movement, dramatically adjusting her air vent, sighing loudly when their elbows touched the shared armrest, even requesting a different flight attendant when the first one sided with Nia. Have you ever sat next to someone who made their hatred this obvious? Someone whose entire body language screamed that you didn't belong? Comment below if you've experienced this kind of treatment. This flight to New York wasn't just a holiday trip. For Nia, it represented reconnection. Her father, Marcus Carter, had been based in New York for the past 6 months, his work schedule making visits nearly impossible. This Christmas break would be their first real time together since summer. What Pamela couldn't see, what no one on that plane understood yet, was the weight of anticipation Nia carried. The text messages planning their Broadway shows. The restaurant reservations. The museum tickets purchased weeks in advance. This wasn't just a flight, it was the beginning of healing a relationship stretched thin by distance. The first-class cabin of Flight 1382 held just 16 passengers that morning. Among them, a retired baseball player, a children's book author, 3 investment bankers, a grandmother visiting her first grandchild, and Pamela Ashford, regional director for a luxury cosmetics brand whose Instagram bio read "Blessed, not lucky." Outside, December painted Dallas in holiday colors. Inside, the cabin's atmosphere grew increasingly tense as Pamela shifted from passive aggression to active hostility. "I can't believe what they're doing to this airline," she muttered to no one in particular. Standards used to mean something. Nia pressed her earbuds deeper, trying to disappear into her music. But Pamela's words penetrated even through Beyoncé's latest album. When people get things they haven't earned, it ruins the experience for everyone who worked for it. The flight attendant, Tiffany, according to her name tag, noticed the tension. She leaned down as she offered Nia a pre-flight beverage. "You okay, honey?" she whispered. Nia nodded, though her eyes betrayed her discomfort. "Don't let her get to you," Tiffany added quietly. "Some people can't handle seeing others succeed. If you've ever had someone stand up for you in a moment like this, drop a red heart in the comments. Those small acts of solidarity matter more than people realize." What no one in that cabin knew was that Captain Marcus Carter had specifically requested this flight. After 6 months of missed weekends and FaceTime calls that couldn't replace presence, he'd arranged everything perfectly. The first-class upgrade for Nia. The 5-day layover in New York. The Christmas Eve reservation at her favorite restaurant. He'd planned to surprise her at the gate, but a last-minute pre-flight check had kept him in the cockpit. Now, as passengers settled in and flight attendants prepared for departure, he adjusted his uniform and checked his watch. The timing would need to be perfect. Back in the cabin, Pamela's phone rang. She answered loudly, her voice carrying through the first-class section. "You won't believe where they've seated me, Victoria. Next to some teenager who clearly doesn't belong here. The airline must be filling quotas or something." Heads turned. A man across the aisle frowned disapprovingly. The grandmother 3 rows up twisted to look back, her face a mask of concern. Nia felt her cheeks burn. She'd been taught how to handle racism, how to stay calm, how to document, how to respond with dignity. But theory and practice were different beasts. Her fingers trembled slightly as she texted her mother again. "It's getting worse." The response came immediately, "Remember who you are. Your father is closer than you think." If only Pamela knew how literal those words would prove to be. Are you still with me? If you've made it this far, you're about to witness one of the most satisfying moments of justice ever captured. Like this video now if you're ready for what happens next. The boarding process continued as Pamela's complaints grew louder. What had begun as subtle digs evolved into a performance designed to humiliate. "Excuse me," Pamela flagged down Tiffany again. "I'd like to speak to the purser about a seating issue." Tiffany's professional smile remained fixed. "The purser is currently assisting with boarding, ma'am. Is there something I can help with?" "Yes. I believe there's been a mistake with the passenger manifest." Pamela's voice carried deliberately. "I've been seated next to someone who clearly isn't supposed to be in first class." The cabin fell silent. Even the ambient sounds of boarding seemed to pause. Tiffany's smile tightened. "Ma'am, all passengers in this cabin have valid first-class tickets. There's no mistake." "But look at her," Pamela insisted, gesturing toward Nia without lowering her voice. "Does she look like she belongs in first class?" The question hung in the air, ugly, explicit, undeniable. A businessman across the aisle removed his AirPods. "Excuse me, but what exactly does first class look like to you?" Pamela flushed. "I simply meant." "We know exactly what you meant," the grandmother called from 3 rows up. "And it's disgraceful. Have you noticed how racists always backpedal when called out directly? Comment, exposed, if you've witnessed this behavior before." Nia sat perfectly still, her face a careful mask. Years of similar encounters had taught her that emotion, any emotion, would be weaponized against her. Anger would make her aggressive. Tears would make her oversensitive. Laughter would make her disrespectful. So she remained still, her dignity her only shield. Pamela wasn't finished. As the confrontation escalated, she shifted tactics. "This isn't about what you're implying," she said to the businessman. "This is about fairness. I've been a loyal customer for 15 years. I've earned my status. And now they're giving premium seats to people who what?" The children's book author spoke up from the row behind. "Finish that sentence, please." "I'm curious." Phones were out now. At least 3 passengers were recording. In the age of viral Karen videos, everyone recognized the unfolding drama's potential. Tiffany intervened again. "Ma'am, I need to remind you that harassing fellow passengers violates our code of conduct. If this continues, I'll need to involve the captain." At the word captain, something flickered across Nia's face. A small smile. Almost imperceptible. Pamela noticed. "What are you smirking about? You think this is funny?" Nia finally spoke, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "No, ma'am. Nothing about this situation is funny." "Then why are you smiling? You know you don't belong here." The businessman stood up. "That's enough. Flight attendant, this woman is creating a hostile environment." Pamela's indignation reached new heights. "I'm creating a hostile environment? I paid $3,000 for this seat. I deserve respect." "Respect is earned," the grandmother called out. "And you're not earning any right now. If you believe respect should be given to everyone regardless of their status, drop a clapping hands in the comments. Let's see who stands for true equality." The confrontation paused as the final boarding announcement came over the intercom. The jet bridge would soon detach. Whatever was happening in this cabin would be sealed inside a metal tube for the next 3 hours. Tiffany leaned down to Nia. "Would you like to move seats? We might be able to find you something away from this situation." The offer was kind but loaded. Moving would mean surrender. It would mean Pamela won. Nia shook her head. "No thank you. This is my assigned seat." Pamela scoffed. Of course she won't move. She knows she lucked into this seat somehow. "It wasn't luck," Nia said quietly. "It was an app upgrade bonus. For frequent flyers." The implication that Nia might also be a frequent flyer, that she might regularly occupy spaces Pamela considered exclusive, seemed to further inflame the situation. "App upgrade? Please. We all know what's really happening here. It's all about diversity points now. Merit doesn't matter anymore." The businessman had enough. "Flight attendant, I want to file a formal complaint. This is blatant racism." Pamela gasped. "How dare you? I never mentioned race." "You didn't have to," the children's book author replied. "Your meaning was clear." As the cabin door closed with a heavy thunk, Pamela realized she was outnumbered. But rather than retreat, she doubled down. "This is ridiculous. I'm going to contact corporate the moment we land. This airline has lost a platinum customer today." Tiffany's professional demeanor finally cracked. "Ma'am, with all due respect, that might be the best news I've heard all day." A few passengers applauded. Someone whispered, "Get her, Tiffany." But the real reckoning was still to come. If you've ever wanted to see justice served in real time, stay with me. What happens next will change everything. Like this video now if you're ready for the twist that shocked everyone on that plane. The safety demonstration began as Flight 1382 prepared for takeoff. Tiffany and the other flight attendants moved through their choreographed motions, pointing to exits and demonstrating oxygen masks with practiced precision. Pamela sat rigid beside Nia, her body angled away as if proximity might somehow contaminate her. The cabin had settled into an uneasy peace, the kind that precedes greater storms. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Nia stared out the window. Dallas sprawled below, a maze of highways and buildings shrinking with each passing minute. Soon she'd be in New York with her father. Soon this would be just another story to tell, another example of the tax paid for existing while black in America. The plane accelerated down the runway, pressing passengers back into their seats. Pamela clutched the armrests, her knuckles white. Nia noticed but said nothing. There was no satisfaction in another's fear, even when that person had tried to diminish her. Once they reached cruising altitude, Tiffany began the beverage service. She started with Nia. "What can I get for you, Miss Carter?" "Apple juice, please." Tiffany served the drink with a warm smile before turning to Pamela. "And for you, ma'am?" Pamela's response was ice cold. "Vodka tonic. Double. I'll need to see ID for alcohol service." Pamela rolled her eyes but produced her driver's license. As Tiffany prepared the drink, Pamela turned to Nia. "So, Carter, that's your last name?" Nia nodded without engaging further. "Interesting. You don't meet many Carters in first class." The businessman across the aisle looked up sharply. "What exactly does that mean?" Pamela waved dismissively. "Nothing. Just making conversation." But she wasn't finished. As Tiffany handed her the vodka tonic, Pamela took a long sip and continued. "So, how exactly did you end up in first class? Family connection? Scholarship program? Special promotion?" Each suggestion carried the same implication. Nia couldn't possibly have earned her seat through normal channels. Nia remained composed. "As I mentioned, it was an app upgrade. I fly frequently between Dallas and New York." "Frequently? At your age? What could possibly require so much travel?" "My father lives in New York." Something in Pamela's expression shifted. A calculation, a reassessment. "Your father. I see. And what does he do?" Before Nia could answer, the grandmother spoke up again. "Young lady, you don't owe this woman any explanations about your family." Pamela turned, affronted. "I'm simply trying to understand the situation." "The situation," the businessman interjected, "is that you can't accept seeing a young black woman in first class. That's the entire situation. Have you noticed how people like this always want to know your credentials? As if you need to justify your presence?" Comment credentials, if you've experienced this kind of interrogation. The tension escalated when turbulence hit. The plane dipped suddenly, causing drinks to slosh and passengers to gasp. The seatbelt sign illuminated with a soft ding. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your first officer speaking. We're experiencing some light turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." Pamela's drink had spilled slightly onto her designer blouse. She dabbed at it furiously, muttering under her breath. When Tiffany passed with napkins, Pamela grabbed her wrist. "This entire flight has been a disaster. First the seating arrangement, now this. I want to speak to the captain." Tiffany gently removed Pamela's hand. "The captain is currently flying the plane, ma'am. He's a bit busy keeping us all safe." "Then I want his name for my complaint." Tiffany hesitated, glancing briefly at Nia. "The captain's name is on your safety card, ma'am." Pamela snatched up the laminated card from her seat pocket. There, printed beneath the airline logo, was the name, Captain Marcus Carter. She stared at it, then at Nia, the wheels turning visibly behind her eyes. "Carter?" she repeated slowly. "The captain's name is Carter." Nia said nothing, but the slight lift at the corner of her mouth spoke volumes. Pamela's voice dropped to a whisper. "Is he related to you?" "Every Carter isn't related, ma'am," Nia replied evenly. That would be quite an assumption. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Pamela's certainty wavered. For the first time since boarding, she looked uncertain. The turbulence increased. The plane shuddered through a rough patch of air. Overhead bins creaked. A baby cried somewhere in economy. Then the captain's voice came over the intercom, deep, authoritative, unmistakably in command. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Carter speaking. We're hitting some weather over Oklahoma. I've turned on the fasten seatbelt sign. Flight attendants, please suspend service and secure the cabin." As the announcement ended, Pamela stared at Nia with new eyes, calculating, reassessing, wondering. The businessman across the aisle hadn't missed the exchange. He leaned forward slightly. "Everything okay over there? You look like you've seen a ghost, ma'am." Pamela ignored him, her attention fixed entirely on Nia. The turbulence subsided, but Pamela's internal storm was just beginning. She studied Nia with new intensity, her eyes darting between the teenager's face and the cockpit door at the front of the cabin. "Carter is a common name," she finally said, more to herself than to Nia. "Probably just a coincidence." Nia sipped her apple juice, neither confirming nor denying. When Tiffany resumed the beverage service, Pamela flagged her down again. This time her approach had changed, her voice lowered, her tone conspiratorial. "Excuse me, Tiffany. I need to speak with you privately." Tiffany glanced at Nia, then back to Pamela. "I can speak with you here, ma'am?" "No, this is sensitive. Security-related." Those two words, security-related, carried weight in air travel. Tiffany hesitated, then nodded toward the galley. Pamela followed, throwing one last glance at Nia over her shoulder. In the small galley space, Pamela leaned close to Tiffany. Their conversation wasn't audible to the cabin, but their body language told the story. Pamela gesturing emphatically. Tiffany's posture stiffening. A shake of the head. More insistent gesturing from Pamela. "Have you ever watched someone try to poison others against you behind your back? Drop a snake in the comments if you've experienced this kind of betrayal." When they returned, Tiffany's face was professionally blank, but her eyes held something new when they met Nia's. Concern, perhaps. Or warning. Pamela settled back into her seat with the satisfied air of someone who believed they'd won. She even smiled at Nia, a cold, calculating smile that never reached her eyes. "Everything okay?" Nia asked, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. "Oh, everything's fine," Pamela replied. "Just addressing some concerns." The businessman across the aisle hadn't missed the exchange. "What kind of concerns require a private conversation?" Pamela ignored him, focusing instead on her phone. She typed rapidly, occasionally glancing at Nia with that same calculating smile. 10 minutes passed in tense silence. Then Tiffany returned with another flight attendant, older, male with the authoritative presence of a purser. "Miss Carter," he said quietly, "could you come with us for a moment?" The request hung in the air. Several passengers looked up, including the grandmother and the children's book author. Nia felt her heart pound. "May I ask why?" "Just a routine question about your boarding process. Nothing to worry about." But there was plenty to worry about. Being singled out. Being questioned. Being removed from her seat while Pamela watched with barely concealed triumph. If you've ever been publicly singled out because of someone else's false accusations, type "targeted" in the comments. Let's see how many of us have faced this kind of situation. As Nia stood, the businessman spoke up. "Excuse me, but what's happening here? This young lady hasn't done anything wrong." The purser maintained his professional demeanor. "Sir, this is a private airline matter." "It stopped being private when you came to remove her in front of everyone," the grandmother called out. "Especially after that woman," she pointed at Pamela, "spent the last hour harassing her." Phones emerged again. The children's book author stood up. "I'm recording this. Just so everyone's clear." Pamela's triumph faltered slightly as she realized the narrative was shifting. "This isn't about harassment. This is about security. I overheard her talking about using her father's credentials to access this flight." The lie was so bold, so brazen that Nia could only stare in disbelief. "That's not true," she finally managed. "I never said anything like that." Pamela doubled down. "I heard you on the phone before boarding. You were bragging about how your father got you into first class. How you didn't have to pay like everyone else." The accusation wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about integrity. About belonging. About worthiness. It was the oldest betrayal in America. The false accusation designed to remove black bodies from white spaces. Notice how quickly, "I don't think she belongs here" becomes "she's a security threat." This escalation has historical roots. Comment if you recognize this dangerous pattern. The purser looked uncomfortable now, caught between protocol and the increasingly clear dynamics of the situation. "Miss Carter, perhaps we could speak privately?" Before Nia could respond, the businessman stood up. "I've been sitting across from this young lady since boarding. She hasn't made a single phone call. This woman," he gestured to Pamela, "is lying." "You don't know what happened before boarding," Pamela snapped. "Neither do you apparently," the children's book author replied, "since you're making things up." The confrontation had drawn attention from economy class now. Faces peered through the curtain dividing the cabins. Flight attendants conferred in hushed tones. Nia stood in the aisle, 17 years old and facing a moment that would define her. She could feel the weight of her mother's teachings, the responsibility of her father's name. "I'd be happy to answer any questions," she said clearly. "But I want to be clear that I have a legitimate ticket, purchased through the airline app with an upgrade applied through the loyalty program. I have not misrepresented myself or used anyone else's credentials." Her composure in the face of accusation was remarkable. Several passengers nodded approvingly. Pamela wasn't finished. "Then why were you smirking earlier when the flight attendant mentioned the captain? You know something you're not telling us." Before Nia could answer, the cockpit door opened. The first officer stepped out, surveying the scene with confusion. "What's happening here?" The purser moved toward him, speaking in low tones. The first officer's expression changed from confusion to something harder as he glanced between Pamela and Nia. He nodded once, then returned to the cockpit. Tiffany approached Nia. "You can return to your seat, Miss Carter. I apologize for the confusion." Pamela stood up. "This is outrageous. I reported a legitimate security concern." "No, ma'am," the purser replied firmly. "You made an accusation without evidence that appears to be motivated by bias." "Bias? How dare you? I never mentioned her race." "You didn't have to," the businessman said. "Your actions spoke clearly enough." As Nia returned to her seat, the cabin erupted in scattered applause. Someone called out, "Stay strong, sister." But the victory felt hollow. The damage was done. The accusation made. The humiliation attempted. And Pamela, though momentarily defeated, didn't look finished. She leaned close to Nia, her voice a venomous whisper. "This isn't over. When we land, I'm filing a formal complaint about you and everyone who defended you." What Pamela didn't realize was that the complaint would never be filed, because something much bigger was about to happen. If you've stayed with me this far, you're about to witness one of the most satisfying moments of justice ever captured. Like this video now if you're ready for the twist that changes everything. The cabin settled into uneasy silence. Nia stared out the window at clouds passing below, trying to process what had just happened. The public accusation. The attempted removal. The way strangers had rallied to her defense. Pamela sat rigid beside her, furiously typing on her phone, presumably drafting the complaint she'd threatened. Her body language screamed indignation, as if she were the victim in this scenario. 20 minutes passed this way. The flight attendants avoided their row, perhaps hoping the tension would dissipate naturally. Other passengers occasionally glanced back, checking on Nia with concerned expressions. Then the captain's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Carter speaking. We've reached our cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. Weather in New York looks clear, and we expect to land on schedule. The seatbelt sign has been turned off, and you're free to move about the cabin." Pause. "However, I've been informed of a situation in the first-class cabin that requires my attention. My first officer will take control while I address this matter personally." The announcement sent a ripple through the cabin. Passengers exchanged glances. Tiffany and the purser conferred near the galley, their expressions unreadable. Pamela's typing stopped mid-sentence. What did he just say? Nia didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the cockpit door which had just opened. Captain Marcus Carter stepped into the cabin. 6 feet tall. Broad shoulders. The 4 gold stripes on his uniform gleaming under the cabin lights. His presence commanded immediate attention, the natural authority of someone responsible for hundreds of lives daily. He moved with purpose down the aisle, his eyes scanning the first-class cabin until they found Nia. And then he smiled. It wasn't the professional smile of a captain addressing passengers. It was personal, warm, familiar. "Nia," he said, his voice carrying through the now silent cabin. "I'm sorry I couldn't meet you at the gate. Pre-flight checks ran longer than expected." The collective realization rippled through the cabin like a wave. Gasp. Widened eyes. Phones raising to capture the moment. But no reaction was more dramatic than Pamela's. The color drained from her face so rapidly it was as if someone had pulled a plug. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again, a fish suddenly finding itself on dry land. "You're her father?" The words barely escaped her lips. Captain Carter turned to her, his expression professionally neutral but his eyes hard as steel. "Yes, ma'am. Nia is my daughter. I understand there's been some question about her right to be seated in first class. If you've ever wanted to see someone's privilege collapse in real time, drop a collision in the comments. This is what justice looks like." Pamela's transformation was remarkable. The arrogance that had fueled her throughout the flight evaporated instantly. In its place, panic. "Captain, there's been a misunderstanding. I never questioned." "That's not what I heard," he interrupted, his voice level but firm. "According to my crew and several passengers, you've harassed my daughter since boarding, questioned her right to be here, and even made false security accusations against her." The businessman across the aisle couldn't contain himself. "She sure did, Captain. Been watching it all unfold. Recorded most of it too," added the children's book author, holding up her phone. Pamela looked around desperately for allies and found none. The cabin that had once seemed like her domain now felt like a courtroom where she stood alone, evidence mounting against her. "Captain, please," she tried again. "This is a simple misunderstanding. I was concerned about." "About what exactly?" Captain Carter's question cut through her excuses like a knife. "About a young black woman sitting in first class? About my daughter occupying space you felt she didn't deserve." The directness of his question, naming the racism that had been dancing unnamed throughout the confrontation, left Pamela speechless. Captain Carter turned to address the entire cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to apologize for the disruption to your flight experience today. At this airline, we have a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior. Every passenger who purchases a ticket or receives an upgrade through our loyalty program deserves to be treated with dignity and respect." He turned back to Pamela. "Ma'am, when we land in New York, a customer service representative will meet you to discuss this incident further. In the meantime, I'd like to offer my daughter a tour of the cockpit if she's interested." Nia stood, her composure finally breaking into a genuine smile. "I'd like that, Dad." As they walked toward the front of the plane, spontaneous applause broke out. The grandmother wiped tears from her eyes. The businessman nodded approvingly. Even passengers from economy who had only caught glimpses of the drama, joined in. Pamela sat alone, diminished, her complaint forgotten as her phone slipped from nerveless fingers onto her lap. Justice had arrived wearing a pilot's uniform. If you believe in karma, this moment is proof it exists. Like this video now if you love seeing racism get the response it deserves. The cockpit tour lasted 15 minutes, long enough for Nia to sit in the captain's seat, examine the controls, and take photos that would later become her most treasured memories of the trip. Long enough for Pamela to sit in humiliated silence, aware that every eye in the cabin was on her, every whispered conversation about her. When Captain Carter escorted Nia back to her seat, he paused beside Pamela. "Ms. Ashford," he said quietly, using her name for the first time. "I want to be clear about something." Pamela looked up, her face a mask of forced composure. "My daughter earned her place on this flight through the same loyalty program you participate in. The difference is she never questioned your right to be here." The words landed with precision. Not just a rebuke but a lesson, one that Pamela was finally forced to hear. "I understand," she whispered. "Do you?" Captain Carter's question hung in the air between them. "Because understanding requires acknowledging the assumptions you made based solely on how my daughter looks." Pamela had no response. For perhaps the first time in her life she had no words, no defense, no way to reframe the narrative in her favor. Captain Carter nodded once, then addressed Tiffany. "Please ensure Miss Carter has everything she needs for the remainder of the flight." "Absolutely, Captain," Tiffany replied with a smile that contained more than professional courtesy. As Captain Carter returned to the cockpit, the cabin buzzed with conversation. Passengers who had witnessed the confrontation recounted details to those who hadn't. Phones displayed videos of the moment the captain had revealed himself as Nia's father. The story was already spreading beyond the confines of Flight 1382. If you're still with me, comment "Justice served" below. Let's celebrate this moment together. The remainder of the flight passed without incident. Pamela requested a blanket and pretended to sleep, though the rigid set of her shoulders betrayed her wakefulness. Nia read quietly, occasionally texting updates to her mother. When the plane began its descent into LaGuardia, Tiffany approached Nia. "Miss Carter, your father asked me to let you know that he's arranged for you to deplane first. He'll meet you at the gate after completing his post-flight checks." Nia nodded. "Thank you, Tiffany. And thank you for everything earlier." Tiffany's professional smile softened into something more genuine. "You handled yourself with incredible grace today. Your parents must be very proud." As the plane touched down on New York soil, Pamela finally spoke again. "I want to apologize," she said, not looking at Nia. "My behavior was inappropriate." The apology hung in the air, incomplete and insufficient. No acknowledgement of racism. No recognition of the harm caused. Just a grudging admission of inappropriateness, as if she'd merely used the wrong fork at dinner. Nia considered her response carefully. She could reject the apology. She could demand more. She could respond with the anger that had been building since boarding. Instead, she channeled her father's authority and her mother's wisdom. "Ms. Ashford, I accept your apology. But I hope today teaches you something important. You never know who people are, what they've earned, or where they belong based on how they look." Pamela nodded stiffly, still avoiding eye contact. "And one more thing," Nia added as the plane taxied to the gate. "The next time you see a black person in first class, remember this flight. Remember that we belong everywhere, even in the cockpit." The businessman across the aisle couldn't contain himself. He broke into applause, quickly joined by others who had overheard the exchange. As promised, Nia was allowed to deplane first. As she walked through the cabin, passengers smiled, nodded, even reached out to touch her arm in solidarity. The grandmother stopped her briefly. "You're going to change the world someday, young lady. Don't ever let anyone make you small." At the gate, Captain Marcus Carter waited in his uniform, standing tall among the crowd of arriving passengers. When Nia emerged, he embraced her tightly. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," he whispered. "I'm not," Nia replied. "Because now I know exactly what Mom meant when she said I come from strength." Behind them, Pamela exited the jet bridge, her designer luggage suddenly seeming like an inadequate shield against the world. She spotted Nia and her father embracing and quickly averted her eyes, hurrying toward the terminal exit. But waiting at the gate was a customer service representative holding a sign with her name. Justice wasn't finished yet. If you believe that actions should have consequences, drop a clapping hands in the comments. Let's see how many of us stand for accountability. 3 days later, Nia and her father sat in a Broadway theater, waiting for Hamilton to begin. Their New York trip had continued as planned. Museum visits, restaurant dinners, long walks through Central Park, catching up on months of separation. But the flight incident had changed something between them. A new understanding had formed. Marcus Carter wasn't just her father now. He was her defender, her ally in a world that sometimes questioned her very presence. "Dad," Nia said quietly as the theater lights dimmed. "Do you think she learned anything?" He knew exactly who she meant. "I don't know, sweetheart. Some people spend their whole lives avoiding the lessons right in front of them." "The airline called me yesterday," he continued. "That video from the flight has over 2 million views now. They wanted to make sure we were okay with how they handled things." "What did you tell them?" "I told them I was proud of their staff for standing up for what's right. And I told them I was even prouder of my daughter." The house lights faded completely as the show began. But Nia's mind remained on the flight, on Pamela, on the moment everything changed. She'd learned something vital on that plane. The world wouldn't always make space for her. Sometimes she'd have to claim it. Sometimes she'd have to defend it. And sometimes, when justice aligned perfectly, she'd get to watch as those who questioned her belonging were forced to question themselves instead. What Nia didn't know, couldn't know, was that the video of Captain Carter revealing himself as her father had indeed gone viral. #Captain's daughter was trending. Morning shows were requesting interviews. The airline had issued a statement reaffirming their commitment to creating an inclusive environment for all passengers. And somewhere in Dallas, Pamela Ashford was facing consequences she never anticipated. The luxury cosmetics brand that employed her as regional director had placed her on administrative leave pending an investigation into behavior inconsistent with our company values. Her carefully curated social media accounts had been set to private after thousands of comments flooded her posts. Friends and colleagues were suddenly too busy to return her calls. But the most significant consequence wasn't external. It was the mirror Pamela now had to face, the reflection of a woman whose assumptions had been broadcast to millions, whose privilege had been publicly dismantled, whose worldview had collided with reality at 35,000 feet. If this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button now. We share these real stories not just for views, but because each one teaches us something vital about the world we live in and the change we need to create. As Hamilton played out on stage, a story about legacy, about who tells your story, about rising up against systems designed to keep you down, Nia realized something profound. Her story on that flight wasn't just about one racist encounter. It was about all the spaces black people had been told they didn't belong. The schools, the neighborhoods, the boardrooms, the first-class cabins, the cockpits. It was about the courage to stay when others want you to leave. It was about the power of having allies, both expected and unexpected. And most importantly, it was about the moment when those who question your presence discover that you're not just meant to be there, you might actually be running the whole damn show. The next time Nia boarded a flight, she walked with new confidence. Not because she expected her father to be the captain, but because she knew with absolute certainty that she belonged, in first class in any space she entered, in a world that sometimes forgot that belonging isn't earned through skin color but through our shared humanity. And if anyone questioned that belonging, well, they might want to check who's flying the plane. This story is based on real events, though names have been changed. If you've experienced similar situations or witnessed them, share your story in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Join our community where we expose racism and celebrate the moments justice is served. Remember, sometimes the most powerful response to racism isn't anger, it's excellence. Excellence they can't ignore. Excellence they can't deny. Excellence that forces them to question everything they thought they knew about who belongs where. Subscribe now, because the next story might be even more powerful than this one.